The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, and when I opened it to find a bill for $2,300 from the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association, I nearly choked on my coffee. I'm Ryan O'Connor, and I'd been living in my modest 3-bedroom house in Pine Ridge, Arizona for exactly 8 months. The development sat on the outskirts of Scottsdale, marketed as an exclusive community with premium amenities. When my wife divorced me last year and I needed a fresh start, this place seemed perfect. Quiet streets, well-maintained properties, and the real estate agent had assured me the HOA fees were reasonable. Those monthly fees were $350, which I paid without complaint. They covered basic things like landscaping of common areas, street lighting, and the neighborhood entrance gate. But this bill was different. This wasn't my regular assessment. The letter detailed charges for infrastructure maintenance on systems that, according to my property deed and the community layout, I didn't even have access to. I read through the itemized list 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. Pool maintenance and resurfacing, $1,500. Tennis court lighting upgrades, $400. Clubhouse HVAC system replacement, $400. The problem? My section of Pine Ridge, officially called Phase 3, had been built 2 years after the original development. We didn't have a pool. We didn't have tennis courts. We didn't have a clubhouse. Those amenities existed in Phase 1 and Phase 2, nearly a mile away on the other side of the development. When I toured houses here, I specifically remembered asking about pool access. The answer had been clear. Phase 3 residents weren't included in those amenities due to the distance, and the fact that Phase 3 was technically a separate parcel that got absorbed into the HOA later. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the HOA bylaws I'd received when I closed on the house. I'd read through them once before signing, making sure there weren't any insane restrictions. Nowhere in those documents did it mention that Phase 3 residents would be responsible for maintaining amenities they couldn't use. My phone rang. The caller ID showed my neighbor, Marcus, from 2 houses down. "Did you get a crazy bill from the HOA?" he asked immediately, skipping any greeting. $2,300, I said. "You too?" $2,100 for me. Ryan, this is insane. I called the HOA office and spoke to some woman named Brenda, who said all residents are responsible for shared infrastructure maintenance regardless of usage. I told her we don't even have access to those facilities, and she said that's not her problem. I felt anger crystallizing in my chest. Did she say anything else? That if we don't pay within 30 days, they'll put a lien on our properties? Can they even do that? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. I'll call you back. I spent the next hour researching Arizona HOA law. The statutes were dense and often contradictory, but a few things became clear. HOAs did have the power to levy special assessments for major repairs and improvements. However, those assessments had to be reasonable and proportional. More importantly, they typically required a vote of the membership for amounts exceeding certain thresholds. I called the HOA office. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. "Pine Ridge HOA, this is Brenda speaking." "Hi, Brenda. This is Ryan O'Connor from 447 Seguero Drive. I received a special assessment bill today that I have some questions about, regarding the infrastructure maintenance charges." Her voice had that practiced patience that customer service people use when they're tired of dealing with complaints. "Yes." "Can you explain why Phase 3 residents are being charged for amenities we don't have access to?" "All Pine Ridge residents share in the costs of maintaining community property. It's in the bylaws." I've read the bylaws. They mention shared common areas, but Phase 3 doesn't have access to the pool, tennis courts, or clubhouse. Those are in Phase 1 and 2. The infrastructure serves the entire community, Brenda said, her tone becoming clipped. Property values benefit everyone. That's not what I asked. Do Phase 3 residents have access to those facilities? There was a pause. You'd need to speak with the board president about policy matters. Great. Can you transfer me? She's not available right now. You can leave a message or attend the next board meeting on the 15th of next month. Next month? The bill is due in 30 days and you're telling me I can't speak to anyone about it for 3 weeks. I'm sorry, those are our procedures. Is there anything else I can help you with? I wanted to say several things, none of them polite. Instead, I took a breath. What's the board president's name? Nancy Winters. Of course it was. Can I have her contact information? We don't give out personal information. You can email the board through our website. I hung up and immediately went to the Pine Ridge HOA website. It was one of those template sites that looked like it had been designed in 2010 and never updated. I found the contact form and wrote a detailed email explaining my situation, requesting a meeting with Nancy Winters or any board member, and asking for clarification on the legal basis for charging Phase 3 residents for Phase 1 and 2 amenities. Then, I called Marcus back. We need to talk to other Phase 3 residents. If they're doing this to us, they're doing it to everyone in our section. I'll start knocking on doors, Marcus said. My wife's friend Linda lives on Prickly Pear Court. I'll call her too. Over the next 2 days, Marcus and I discovered that all 47 homes in Phase 3 had received identical special assessment bills. The amounts varied slightly based on square footage, but everyone was being charged between $2,000 and $2,500 for infrastructure they couldn't use. Several residents had already paid, worried about the lien threat. Others were furious but didn't know what to do. A few had already contacted attorneys, which gave me an idea. I called a real estate attorney named David Chen, whose name I found through an online search. His office was in downtown Scottsdale, and he agreed to see me the next day. Chen was younger than I expected, probably mid-30s, with sharp eyes and an office decorated with framed case documents that suggested he enjoyed winning. I explained the situation, showing him the assessment bill, my property deed, and the HOA bylaws. He read through everything carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "This is interesting," he finally said. "Your deed specifically describes your property as part of Phase 3, which according to this plat map is a distinct section with its own entrance and street system. The amenities in question are physically located in Phase 1 and 2. And we've never had access to them," I added. "There's not even a walking path connecting our section to theirs." The HOA bylaws do state that all residents share in maintenance costs for common areas, but there's a question of whether amenities that a subset of residents can't access qualify as true common areas. He tapped his pen against the desk. The key issue is whether Phase 3 was properly incorporated into the HOA and under what terms. When did you say Phase 3 was built? About 2 years after Phase 1 and 2, according to the developer records. And did Phase 3 residents ever vote to join this HOA, or was it automatic? I hadn't considered that. I don't know. It was already part of the HOA when I bought the house. Chen nodded. That's what we need to find out. If Phase 3 was forced into the HOA without proper consideration of different amenity access, there might be a legal challenge. Even if it was properly incorporated, charging you for facilities you can't use could be considered unreasonable under Arizona law. So what do I do? First, don't pay this assessment. Not yet. Second, document everything. Get statements from other Phase 3 residents. Take photos showing the physical separation between your section and the amenities. Third, formally request a copy of the master deed, all amendments to the HOA bylaws, and minutes from the board meeting where this assessment was approved. They're going to stonewall me, I said. The office manager already refused to let me talk to the board president. They're required by law to provide those documents to homeowners. If they refuse, that's another problem for them. I'll draft a formal records request letter you can send certified mail. That creates a paper trail. I left Chen's office feeling slightly better but significantly poorer after writing a check for his retainer. Still, this was better than rolling over and paying $2,000 for nothing. That evening, I organized a meeting at my house with Phase 3 residents. 23 people showed up, cramming into my living room and kitchen. Marcus had spread the word efficiently. I explained what I'd learned from the attorney and showed everyone the records request letter Chen had prepared. So we're just not going to pay. Asked a woman named Jennifer who lived on Desert Bloom Lane. They'll put liens on all our houses. They can threaten that, but actually doing it requires a legal process, I explained. And if their assessment is invalid, those liens won't hold up, but everyone needs to make their own decision. I'm not paying until I get answers. I already paid, admitted an older man named Tom. I was worried about my credit score. You might be able to get that money back if we prove this is invalid, I said. Keep your receipt and any correspondence. A younger guy named Chris who worked in tech raised his hand. I've been looking at the HOA website. Their financial documents are public record, right? Has anyone actually looked at where our money goes? That sparked another conversation. It turned out none of us had really examined the HOA's budget beyond our monthly fees. Chris volunteered to dig into the publicly posted financial statements and report back. We agreed to form a sort of informal committee. I would handle the legal correspondence. Marcus would keep organizing residents. Chris would investigate the finances. Jennifer, who worked in public relations, would help us communicate clearly with the board. The next day, I sent the records request letter via certified mail. According to Arizona law, the HOA had 10 business days to respond. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything Chen had suggested. I drove around Pine Ridge with my phone, taking video of the layout. Phase 1 and 2 were on the north side of Pine Ridge Parkway, the main road through the development. They had their entrance gate, their streets winding through well-landscaped grounds. The pool was clearly visible from the street, a large resort-style facility with a separate building that housed the clubhouse. The tennis courts were adjacent, 4 courts with professional lighting. Phase 3 was south of Pine Ridge Parkway, accessed by a completely different entrance. Our streets were newer, the trees smaller. Our section had its own small park with playground equipment and a ramada, but that was it. To get from Phase 3 to the Phase 1 and 2 amenities, you'd have to exit our section, drive along the parkway, and enter through their gate. The gates required an access code. I stopped at the Phase 1 gate and tried the code from my gate remote. It didn't work. I wasn't surprised, but it was more proof that we weren't truly integrated into that section of the community. Back home, I got a call from Chris. "Dude, you need to see what I found in the HOA financial records." He came over with his laptop and spreadsheets that made my head hurt. "Look at this," Chris said, pointing to a line item. "The HOA has been running a deficit for the past 3 years. They've been using reserve funds to cover operating expenses. Is that legal? Technically, but it's a huge red flag. Reserve funds are supposed to be for emergencies and major repairs, not regular operations. And look here, There's been 3 special assessments in the past 4 years, all for Phase 1 and 2 infrastructure, and all of them charged to everyone including Phase 3. We've been subsidizing their amenities this whole time. Looks like it. And check out the board composition. All 5 board members live in Phase 1 or 2. Not a single Phase 3 representative. That was the detail that made everything click into place. This wasn't just about one unfair assessment. It was a pattern of Phase 1 and 2 residents using Phase 3 as a piggy bank to maintain their premium amenities while excluding us from access. We need to bring this up at the next board meeting, I said. That's 3 weeks away. We should demand an emergency meeting. Jennifer helped us draft a letter, signed by 32 Phase 3 residents, formally requesting an emergency board meeting to discuss the special assessment and the pattern of unequal treatment. We cited specific sections of Arizona HOA law that gave homeowners the right to petition for such meetings. We sent it certified mail, with copies to each individual board member at their home addresses, which we found through public property records. 2 days later, I got a phone call from an unknown number. "Is this Ryan O'Connor?" The voice was female, sharp, and annoyed. "Yes, who's this?" "Nancy Winters, HOA board president. I received your extremely inappropriate letter." "Inappropriate how?" "We followed the proper procedure for requesting an emergency meeting. You harassed board members by sending mail to their private homes. That's unacceptable." I felt my jaw clench. Those addresses are public record, and we're homeowners trying to exercise our rights. The HOA office wasn't responding to our concerns, so we escalated appropriately. "Your concerns have been noted. The special assessment is valid and required. All infrastructure costs are shared community expenses." "Then why don't Phase 3 residents have access to the infrastructure we're paying for? The facilities are available to all residents." "Really?" "Because I tried to use my gate code at the Phase 1 entrance and it didn't work." There was a pause. "That's a security measure. You can request temporary access codes for events. That's not equal access, and you know it. We're paying the same rates plus these special assessments for facilities we can't readily use. That's not fair or legal." "Mr. O'Connor, I don't appreciate your tone or your attempt to rile up other residents. The board has full authority under the bylaws to levy assessments as needed for community maintenance. If you don't like it, you're free to sell your house and move elsewhere. Or we could vote you off the board and elect representatives who actually care about all residents, not just Phase 1 and 2. Good luck with that." Her voice dripped with condescension. "The annual meeting isn't for 8 months. Now, are you going to pay your assessment or continue wasting everyone's time?" "I'll see you at the emergency meeting," I said and hung up. My hands were shaking. I dealt with difficult people in my career as a project manager for a construction company. But Nancy Winters had a special talent for being infuriating. 3 days after that call, I received a response to my records request. But instead of the documents I'd asked for, it was a letter from an attorney representing the HOA. The letter stated that my request was overly broad and burdensome, and that I needed to narrow my request to specific documents. It also warned that if I continued to harass board members and stir up dissent, the HOA would consider taking legal action against me for violating community harmony provisions in the bylaws. I immediately forwarded it to David Chen. He called me within an hour. "This is actually good for us." "How is threatening me with legal action good?" "Because they're scared. The records request was completely reasonable, and they're legally required to provide those documents. By refusing and then threatening you, they're showing they have something to hide. Also, this community harmony clause they're citing, That's almost certainly unenforceable. You have a First Amendment right to communicate with your neighbors about community issues. So, what do? I'm going to file a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They oversee HOAs and can investigate complaints about boards not following the law. I'm also going to prepare a letter explaining that their threats are baseless and demanding they comply with the records request within 5 days or face legal action. This is getting expensive. I know. But here's something to consider. If we end up filing a lawsuit and win, the HOA would likely be required to pay your attorney fees. These cases hinge on whether the board is acting in good faith and following the law. Based on what I'm seeing, they're doing neither. Chen's letter must have had an impact because 4 days later, a large envelope arrived with the requested documents. I spread them across my dining room table and started reading. The master deed was from 2018 when Phase 1 was built. Phase 2 was added in 2019 with an amendment. Then, in 2021, there was another amendment adding Phase 3 to the HOA. The language was interesting. It stated that Phase 3 would be incorporated into the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association with all rights and responsibilities of membership. The problem was what came next. There was a separate document, a Phase 3 addendum, that specified Phase 3 would have its own common areas, including the park and playground, which Phase 3 residents would maintain through their HOA fees. It explicitly stated that Phase 3 residents would not have automatic access to Phase 1 and 2 amenities, but could purchase access through an optional annual fee. I read that paragraph 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. Phase 3 was never supposed to have automatic access to the pool, tennis courts, and clubhouse. We were a semi-independent section within the larger HOA. We paid fees for our own area maintenance and for the overall community infrastructure like the main entrance signs, the parkway landscaping, and street lights. But the special assessments being levied were specifically for Phase 1 and 2 amenities. According to this addendum, we shouldn't be paying for those at all. I called Chen immediately and read him the relevant sections. "That's the smoking gun," he said, audibly excited. "They can't charge you for maintaining facilities you don't have access to and aren't part of your agreement. This is a clear breach of the HOA's own governing documents. So, what do? Now we fight back. I'm going to prepare a formal legal demand letter to the board explaining why the assessment is invalid and demanding they rescind it. If they refuse, we file a lawsuit. On behalf of all Phase 3 residents, potentially as a class action, yes, but let's start with the demand letter and see how they respond." I shared the documents with the Phase 3 committee. Everyone was energized by the discovery. This wasn't just unfair. It was documentably illegal based on the HOA's own rules. Jennifer suggested we inform all Phase 3 residents before the HOA board could spin the situation. We put together a clear, factual summary of what we'd found and distributed it to every house in our section. The response was overwhelming. Residents who'd been on the fence about challenging the assessment were now ready to fight. Several who'd already paid demanded refunds. The Facebook group someone had created for Phase 3 residents exploded with activity. 2 days later, Nancy Winters called another HOA-wide meeting, not just for Phase 3. The email announcement said it was a mandatory informational session regarding recent misinformation being spread by certain residents. The meeting was scheduled for the clubhouse. The clubhouse that Phase 3 residents supposedly couldn't access. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus, Chris, Jennifer, and I arrived together. The parking lot was packed. Apparently, Phase 1 and 2 residents were curious about what was happening too. The clubhouse was nice, I had to admit. High ceilings, modern furniture, a full kitchen visible through a serving window. Nancy Winters stood at the front of the room next to a podium, flanked by 4 other board members. 2 men and 2 women, all looking to be in their 50s or 60s, all wearing expressions of barely concealed annoyance. Nancy was exactly what I'd pictured from her voice. Mid-50s, blonde hair in a severe bob, wearing a blazer that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." Her makeup was perfect, her posture rigid, and when she looked at me entering the room, her eyes could have frozen lava. The room filled quickly. I estimated about 150 people, which was impressive for a community of 200 homes. Nancy banged a gavel on the podium. "This meeting will come to order. We're here tonight to address false and inflammatory statements that have been circulating regarding the recent special assessment." I raised my hand. Nancy ignored me. "The board wants to make clear that all assessments are legal, proper, and in accordance with our governing documents. Some residents have been misrepresenting facts and causing unnecessary alarm." I raised my hand higher. So did Marcus, and Chris, and at least a dozen other Phase 3 residents. "We'll take questions after the presentation," Nancy said tersely. She launched into a PowerPoint presentation about the HOA's infrastructure needs. The pool needed resurfacing. The tennis court lights were original equipment from 2018 and failing. The clubhouse HVAC system was undersized and couldn't handle Arizona summers. Everything she described was legitimate maintenance. But none of it was in Phase 3. When she finally opened the floor to questions, I was the first one standing. "Nancy, I'm Ryan O'Connor from Phase 3. I have a question about the legal basis for this assessment." "It's Mrs. Winters," she corrected coldly. "And the legal basis is in our bylaws, which authorize the board to levy assessments for community maintenance." I've read the bylaws, and I've also read the Phase 3 addendum to the master deed. According to that document, Phase 3 residents don't have automatic access to Phase 1 and 2 amenities and maintain our own common areas. "How can you charge us for maintaining facilities we don't use and aren't part of our agreement?" The room went quiet. I could feel people's attention shifting between Nancy and me. Nancy's face tightened. "All residents benefit from well-maintained facilities, regardless of personal use. Property values throughout Pine Ridge are enhanced when the community is properly maintained." That's not what I asked. The Phase 3 addendum specifically states that we have our own common areas and can purchase access to your amenities through an optional fee. That means we're not supposed to be automatically charged for them. That addendum was superseded by subsequent board policies. Show me that in writing. I've reviewed all the documents you provided in response to my records request, and there's nothing superseding the addendum. A man in the front row, one of the board members, leaned toward Nancy and whispered something. She listened, then turned back to me. "The board's authority is clearly established. If you have concerns, you're welcome to file a formal complaint." I already have. "With your attorney and now with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. But since we're all here, let's talk about another issue. Why are all 5 board members from Phase 1 and 2? Where's Phase 3's representation?" Another Phase 3 resident, a woman named Sarah, stood up. "I've been living here for 18 months and I've never seen an election notice. How do we vote for board members?" Nancy's expression was becoming increasingly strained. "Elections are held annually in accordance with our bylaws. All residents are notified." "I've never received a notification," Sarah said. Several other Phase 3 residents echoed her. Chris stood up, holding his laptop. I've reviewed the HOA meeting minutes for the past 3 years. There's no record of any election. The current board members have been in place since 2019, before Phase 3 even existed. When was the last actual election? The room erupted in conversation. Nancy banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. This meeting is not a forum for baseless accusations. The board has acted in full compliance with all regulations. Then prove it, I said loudly. Show us the election records. Show us the vote approving this special assessment. Show us the legal basis for charging Phase 3 residents for Phase 1 and 2 amenities. I don't have to prove anything to you, Mr. O'Connor. The board's decisions are final unless challenged through proper legal channels. That's exactly what we're doing, I said. I have an attorney who's reviewed the governing documents. This assessment violates your own rules. And if you proceed with liens against Phase 3 residents, we'll file a class action lawsuit. The room exploded again. Phase 1 and 2 residents were talking among themselves, some looking concerned, others confused. Phase 3 residents were shouting support and questions. Nancy's face had gone from annoyed to genuinely angry. This meeting is adjourned. Any residents with specific concerns can submit them in writing to the HOA office. You can't just adjourn when you don't like the questions, Marcus called out. But Nancy was already leaving, the other board members following her like ducklings. They disappeared through a side door, leaving the room in chaos. I stood there feeling a mix of satisfaction and anxiety. We'd made our point publicly, but we'd also made enemies of the entire board. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. Chen filed a formal lawsuit on behalf of 12 Phase 3 residents, including me, challenging the special assessment and seeking declaratory relief about Phase 3's obligations under the HOA agreement. The lawsuit also raised questions about the lack of elections and Phase 3 representation on the board. The HOA's attorney responded with a motion to dismiss, arguing we hadn't exhausted administrative remedies. But they also did something unexpected. They scheduled an emergency board meeting and announced a vote to amend the bylaws to clarify that all residents were responsible for all infrastructure, regardless of access. They're trying to change the rules mid-game, Chen explained over the phone. But here's the thing. Under Arizona law, amendments to HOA bylaws require a vote of the membership, not just the board. And even if they hold a vote, they can't make it retroactive. They can't use an amendment to validate an assessment that's already invalid. So what do? Show up to that board meeting with every Phase 3 resident you can gather. Object formally to any amendments that weren't properly noticed to the full membership, and keep documenting everything. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Jennifer put out a call to action, and we managed to get 38 Phase 3 residents to commit to attending. The meeting was back in the clubhouse. This time, Nancy had obviously prepared. There were folding chairs set up in rows, name tags for board members at a long table in front, and a court reporter sitting in the corner with a stenography machine. She was taking this seriously. Nancy called the meeting to order promptly at 7. Tonight's agenda includes a vote on Amendment 17 to the Pine Ridge HOA bylaws, which clarifies assessment procedures for all phases of the development. Point of order, I said, standing up. Has this amendment been properly noticed to all homeowners, as required by Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33-1805? Nancy's jaw clenched. The amendment was posted on the HOA website 48 hours ago. The law requires written notice mailed or delivered to all homeowners at least 14 days before a vote on bylaw amendments. A website posting doesn't meet that requirement. The HOA attorney, a thin man in an expensive suit sitting next to Nancy, leaned over and whispered to her. She listened, her expression darkening. "We're not holding a formal vote tonight," Nancy said. "This is a discussion of proposed amendments." "Then why does your agenda say vote on Amendment 17? Chris called out from the back. "The agenda was preliminary. We're here to discuss the amendment and hear feedback before proceeding with a formal vote." It was an obvious backpedal, but legally it probably saved them from a procedural violation. Still, the fact that they'd been willing to try to ram through an amendment without proper notice was telling. Nancy proceeded to read the proposed amendment. The language was dense and full of legal jargon, but the core message was clear. All residents would be equally responsible for all infrastructure costs, regardless of phase or access to amenities. When she finished, she opened the floor to comments. I stood up again. This amendment directly contradicts the Phase 3 addendum, which is part of our property deeds. You can't unilaterally change deed restrictions through a bylaw amendment. That would require individual agreement from every Phase 3 homeowner. The amendment clarifies existing obligations. It doesn't create new ones, the HOA attorney said smoothly. That's not what it does, and you know it. The Phase 3 addendum clearly states that we maintain our own common areas and that access to Phase 1 and 2 amenities is optional. This amendment tries to erase that distinction. A Phase 1 resident stood up. "I'm confused. Are you saying Phase 3 residents don't pay HOA fees?" "We pay the same fees you do," I explained, turning to address the room. $350 a month. "But according to our original agreement, our fees go toward maintaining our section and the shared infrastructure like entrance signs and parkway lighting." "Your fees go toward maintaining your section, including the pool, tennis courts, and clubhouse." "That's fair because we don't have access to those amenities." "You can use them if you want," Nancy interjected. "We've never prohibited Phase 3 residents from applying for access." "At what cost?" Sarah asked, standing up. "How much is this optional access fee?" Nancy hesitated. "That varies depending on usage." "You don't actually have an access fee program, do you?" I said. "Because you never intended to give us access. You just wanted our money to subsidize your amenities." "That's a slanderous accusation," Nancy snapped. "Then prove me wrong. Show us the access fee program. Show us how many Phase 3 residents have purchased access. Show us any record of Phase 3 residents using these facilities." The room fell silent. Nancy stared at me with undisguised hatred. "The board will take all comments under advisement," she finally said. "This meeting is adjourned." Walking out of the clubhouse, Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. "You got under her skin." "I'm worried we're pushing too hard too fast," I admitted. "They're going to retaliate somehow." I was right. 3 days later, I received a violation notice from the HOA. My trash cans were visible from the street past the allowed time. My house numbers needed repainting, and my front yard landscaping was not in compliance with community standards. Every single item was petty and debatable. My trash cans had been out for maybe an hour past pickup time because I'd been at work. My house numbers were slightly faded but perfectly readable. My landscaping looked identical to my neighbor's, but each violation came with a $50 fine. Within a day, every member of the Phase 3 committee received similar violation notices. Marcus got cited for a crack in his driveway. Chris was told his mailbox was the wrong color, even though it was the same color it had been when he bought the house. Jennifer was cited for parking her car on the street overnight, despite there being no rule prohibiting it. "They're retaliating," Chen said when I showed him the notices. "And that's illegal." Selective enforcement of rules to punish homeowners for exercising their legal rights is a clear violation of HOA law. Can we prove that's what they're doing? The timing alone is pretty damning. You challenge them publicly, and suddenly you're all receiving multiple violations. We'll add this to the lawsuit as evidence of bad faith, but the violations kept coming. Every few days, another notice. They were clearly hoping we'd either back down or make a mistake that would give them grounds to fine us into submission. Then things took a darker turn. I came home from work one evening to find my mailbox knocked over. At first, I thought it was vandalism, maybe teenagers being stupid. But then Marcus called. Someone slashed my tires, all 4 of them. When? Sometime today while I was at work. And check this out, they left a note on my windshield. It says, "Mind your own business." My stomach dropped. Did you call the police? They just left. Took a report and the note, but they said unless I have security camera footage or witnesses, there's not much they can do. I walked outside and looked at my fallen mailbox more carefully. It hadn't been hit by a car. The post had been sawed through about halfway, then kicked over. This was deliberate. Over the next week, 4 more Phase 3 committee members experienced similar incidents. Garbage dumped on lawns. Garden hoses turned on, flooding yards. One person's outdoor security cameras were spray-painted. We filed police reports for each incident, but without direct evidence connecting them to the HOA, there wasn't much the Scottsdale Police Department could do. "This is harassment," Jennifer said at an emergency committee meeting at my house. "They're trying to scare us into dropping the lawsuit. The question is whether it's the board doing this directly or just sympathetic residents," Chris said. "Either way, it's working. 3 families have told me they're dropping out of the lawsuit because they're scared." I felt anger and frustration warring in my chest. We can't let them intimidate us. That's exactly what they want. "Easy for you to say. You don't have kids who play in your front yard," Sarah said. She joined the committee after the clubhouse meeting. "I'm all for fighting this legally, but if it turns dangerous, I have to prioritize my family's safety." She was right. This had started as a dispute about money and fairness, but it was evolving into something uglier. I called Chen and explained the situation. "Can we get a restraining order or something?" "Against who specifically?" "Unless you can prove the board or specific individuals are behind the harassment, a court won't issue an order, but keep documenting everything." These incidents show a pattern of intimidation that could be relevant to the lawsuit. The lawsuit itself was moving slowly through the court system. The HOA's motion to dismiss had been denied, which was a victory, but now we were in discovery. That meant both sides could request documents and depositions from each other. Chen was requesting financial records, board meeting minutes, correspondence about Phase 3, and depositions from all 5 board members. The HOA was requesting personal financial information from the 12 plaintiffs, which felt invasive but was apparently standard in this type of case. Months were passing. It was now July, 6 months since I'd received that first special assessment bill. The HOA had placed liens on the properties of everyone who hadn't paid, including mine. They hadn't foreclosed yet, but the threat hung over us. Then we got a break. Chris, who'd been digging through the financial records the HOA was forced to produce during discovery, found something damning. "Look at this," he said, showing up at my house late one evening with his laptop. "These are credit card statements for the HOA's accounts. Nancy Winters has been using the HOA credit card for personal expenses." I looked at the highlighted transactions: restaurants, spa services, online shopping. Thousands of dollars over the past 2 years. Are we sure these aren't legitimate HOA expenses? Unless the HOA needs regular manicures and takeout from Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, no. And look at this one. A $4,000 transaction at a travel agency for a cruise to the Bahamas. The memo says board appreciation event, but there's no record of any such event in the meeting minutes, and none of the other board members took a cruise. She's embezzling. Looks like it. And there's more. A lot of the special assessments over the past 3 years. The money didn't all go to the stated purposes. Some of it went into the general operating fund, which Nancy has been treating like her personal checking account. This changed everything. We immediately sent the information to Chen. His response was swift. This is potentially criminal. I'm ethically obligated to report this to the authorities if we have solid evidence of embezzlement from the HOA. Do it, I said. She's been treating us like criminals for questioning her authority, and all along she's been stealing from us. Chen contacted the Scottsdale Police Department's white-collar crime division and provided them with the financial records and our analysis. He also amended our lawsuit to include allegations of financial mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty by the board. The police investigation took several weeks. During that time, the harassment incidents in Phase 3 stopped completely. I suspected someone had warned Nancy that things were escalating beyond HOA politics. In late August, I was working from home when I saw police cars pull up to a house in Phase 1. I recognized the address from public records. It was Nancy Winter's house. I watched from my car, having driven over out of curiosity, as officers knocked on her door and then led her out in handcuffs. She was screaming about unlawful arrest and demanding her lawyer, her face red and twisted with rage. The local news that evening reported that the HOA president of a Scottsdale community had been arrested on multiple counts of theft and fraud for embezzling over $80,000 from the Homeowners Association over a 3-year period. Our phones exploded with calls and texts. Phase 3 residents were celebrating, but so were Phase 1 and 2 residents who'd had no idea their board president was stealing from them. With Nancy arrested, the rest of the HOA board scrambled to distance themselves from her. Within a week, 2 board members resigned. The remaining 2 called an emergency membership meeting and announced they were rescinding all special assessments pending a full financial audit and board elections. The meeting was packed. For the first time, Phase 1, 2, and 3 residents were united, all of us angry about having been stolen from and mismanaged. A Phase 2 resident named Patricia, who was a retired accountant, volunteered to oversee an independent audit. Several people nominated themselves for the board, including Marcus from Phase 3. The revelations kept coming as the audit progressed. Nancy hadn't just embezzled money. She'd also approved payments to vendors owned by her relatives, inflating costs and pocketing kickbacks. The pool resurfacing that supposedly cost $40,000. It actually cost $22,000. The difference went to Nancy's brother's company as a consulting fee for a job he never did. The tennis court lighting upgrade, never fully completed. The HVAC replacement for the clubhouse. The old system worked fine. Nancy had approved an unnecessary replacement because the vendor was her friend and gave her a cash kickback. Nearly half of the special assessments over 3 years had been based on inflated or fraudulent expenses, with Nancy and her associates stealing the difference. The total amount of confirmed theft and fraud exceeded $150,000. In early October, the HOA held its first legitimate board election in years. Marcus was elected as one of 5 new board members, along with 2 Phase 1 residents, 1 Phase 2 resident, and another Phase 3 resident named David. The new board's first act was to officially rescind all special assessments from the past 2 years and remove all related liens. They also voted to pursue civil action against Nancy Winters to recover the stolen funds, on top of the criminal charges she was facing. The second act was to formally recognize the Phase 3 addendum and establish clear policies about cost sharing. Phase 3 residents would continue paying our regular HOA fees for maintaining our section and shared community infrastructure. If we wanted access to Phase 1 and 2 amenities, we could purchase an annual pass for $300, with the money going toward maintaining those specific facilities. It was fair. It was reasonable. It was what should have been done from the beginning. The new board also implemented financial controls, requiring 2 board members to approve any expense over $500 and mandatory quarterly reports to the membership. Nancy's criminal trial took place the following spring. I attended several days of testimony, partly out of curiosity and partly because Chen thought it might be relevant to our ongoing civil lawsuit. Watching Nancy in court was surreal. The imperious, condescending woman who treated Phase 3 residents with such contempt now sat quietly at the defense table, wearing a modest dress and glasses, her lawyer trying to paint her as a confused volunteer who'd made accounting mistakes. The prosecution shredded that defense. They had bank records, credit card statements, emails coordinating kickback schemes, and testimony from vendors she'd pressured into fraudulent arrangements. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Nancy tried to make a statement about how she'd dedicated years to the community and made some poor choices but didn't deserve prison. The judge cut her off. "Mrs. Winters, you held a position of trust and used it to systematically steal from your neighbors for years. You didn't just take money. You tried to use your position to intimidate and silence anyone who questioned you. The evidence shows a pattern of manipulation, fraud, and abuse of power. The court sentences you to 4 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections, followed by 5 years of probation, and orders you to pay full restitution of $153,000. Nancy's face crumpled. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder as the bailiff approached to take her into custody. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction that justice had been served, but also sadness that it had come to this. Nancy had destroyed her own life through greed and arrogance. Our civil lawsuit was settled a month later. The HOA's insurance covered most of the damages, and the new board agreed to pay our attorney fees and formally apologize to all Phase 3 residents. They also paid back everyone who'd paid the invalid special assessments with interest. I received a check for $2,400, covering my legal expenses and the stress of 9 months of fighting. It wasn't about the money anymore, though. It was about the principle of standing up against unfair treatment. Marcus and I were having beers on my back patio one evening in June, almost exactly a year after this whole mess had started. "You ever regret not just paying that first assessment and moving on?" he asked. I thought about it. Sometimes it would have been easier, but then Nancy would have kept stealing and Phase 3 would have kept getting screwed and nothing would have changed. True. Plus, now I'm on the HOA board, which I never expected. Patricia talked me into running for a second term. Are you going to? Probably. Someone needs to keep things honest. Besides, the new board is actually functional. We get things done, we're transparent with the finances, and nobody's embezzling. Setting the bar high there, he laughed. Fair point. The community felt different now. Phase 1, 2, and 3 residents actually talked to each other at neighborhood events. There was a shared understanding that we'd all been victims of the same corruption and had come together to fix it. The playground in Phase 3 got upgraded with new equipment. Funded by the recovered restitution money the court ordered Nancy to pay back. The new board decided to invest in amenities for all phases, not just Phase 1 and 2. I even bought one of those $300 annual passes to the Phase 1 and 2 facilities. I'd started swimming laps at the pool in the mornings before work. It was nice, and it felt fair, paying for something I actually used. One Saturday afternoon, I was at the pool when a woman I recognized from Phase 2 approached me. Her name was Helen, and she'd been at several of the contentious meetings during the fight with Nancy. "You're Ryan O'Connor, right?" she asked. "That's me. I wanted to thank you." My husband and I had no idea what Nancy was doing. We trusted her completely. If you and the other Phase 3 residents hadn't pushed back on that assessment, she might have kept stealing for years. I appreciate that. Honestly, I just didn't want to pay for something I couldn't use. I had no idea it would uncover all that fraud. Still, it took courage to stand up to her. She was intimidating, and she made a lot of people afraid to question anything. That was true. Nancy had ruled the HOA through a combination of procedural knowledge, aggressive confidence, and willingness to retaliate against anyone who challenged her. It had worked for years because most people didn't want the hassle of fighting. I'd been lucky in some ways. I was single. I had the financial resources to hire an attorney, and my job was stable enough that I could handle the stress. Not everyone would have been in a position to fight back the way I did, but that's exactly why it had been important to do it. Because the Nancy Winters of the world count on people being too busy, too scared, or too isolated to resist. They exploit that to get away with abuse and theft. That evening, I was cleaning up from dinner when my phone rang. It was an unknown number with an Arizona area code. "Hello. Mr. O'Connor. This is Detective Sarah Martinez with Scottsdale Police. I'm calling about the harassment incidents you reported last year related to the HOA situation." My heart rate picked up. "Yes. We've been going through Nancy Winters' emails and text messages as part of the criminal investigation. We found evidence that she coordinated several of the incidents targeting you and other Phase 3 residents. She was directly involved. She didn't physically do anything herself, but she encouraged it and provided information like addresses and schedules to others. We've identified 2 individuals who carried out the vandalism and property damage on her behalf. Both are being charged as accomplices. Who are they? I can't share that right now, but they're not HOA board members. Friends of Mrs. Winters who she convinced that you and the other Phase 3 residents were trying to destroy the community. She manipulated them into thinking they were protecting property values. It made a sick kind of sense. Nancy had painted us as troublemakers and probably sold some story about how we were going to ruin Pine Ridge for everyone. She'd weaponized other residents against us. Will there be additional charges against Nancy? The prosecutor is reviewing whether to add conspiracy or intimidation charges. I'll keep you updated. I wanted you to know we're taking this seriously, and we did find evidence supporting your reports. After she hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about how close things had come to getting really dangerous. If one of those incidents had escalated, if someone had gotten hurt, it could have been so much worse. The 2 individuals Detective Martinez mentioned were eventually charged with criminal damage and conspiracy. They took plea deals and got probation plus restitution. Nancy got additional charges added to her case, extending her sentence by another year. By the fall, life in Pine Ridge had returned to something approaching normal. The new HOA board was functioning well. Finances were transparent, and the community had implemented better oversight policies. People were actually reading the monthly financial reports now, having learned the hard way that blind trust in leadership was dangerous. I'd become something of a minor celebrity in Phase 3, which was both flattering and embarrassing. People thanked me at neighborhood barbecues, and I got invited to serve on various committees. I declined most of them, having had enough of HOA politics for a lifetime, but I did agree to help review the annual budget each year. Marcus thrived on the board, turning out to be a natural leader who could work with different personalities and find compromises. He told me he was considering running for board president next election. "You should do it," I told him. "You'd be good at it." I never thought I'd be this involved in HOA stuff. Before all this, I barely read the newsletters. None of us did. That's part of how Nancy got away with it for so long. Jennifer ended up writing a series of articles about the experience for a local news website. Her pieces focused on HOA reform and how homeowners can protect themselves from board abuse. They got a lot of attention and were even cited in a proposed Arizona state law to increase HOA oversight. Chris took his financial analysis skills and started a consulting business, helping other HOAs audit their books and implement better controls. He told me he'd already found problems at 3 other associations in the Phoenix metro area, though nothing as egregious as what Nancy had done. As for me, I was content to return to being a regular homeowner. I paid my HOA fees, I used the pool, I kept my property maintained, and I didn't attend board meetings unless there was something specific I cared about. The lawsuit was fully resolved by December. The judge had ruled in our favor on every major issue, establishing precedent about HOA boards needing to treat all residents fairly and uphold the specific terms of different phases agreements. Chen told me the case was already being cited in other HOA disputes around Arizona. On Christmas Eve, I was hanging lights on my house when a car pulled up and a woman got out. She was in her 30s, professionally dressed, carrying a folder. "Ryan O'Connor?" she asked. "Yes. I'm Amanda Peterson. I live in a community in Tucson with an HOA situation similar to what you dealt with. I read about your case, and I was hoping I could ask you some questions about how you organized your fight." We ended up talking for almost an hour. Her HOA was charging residents in a newer section for amenities in the older section, just like Pine Ridge had done to Phase 3. She had documentation, she had angry neighbors, but she didn't know how to proceed effectively. I gave her Chen's contact information and walked her through the key steps. Document everything, get legal advice early, organize your neighbors, understand your governing documents, and don't let the board intimidate you. "The hardest part is standing up first," I told her. "Once you do, you'll find out you're not alone. There are other people who feel the same way but are waiting for someone else to take the lead." She thanked me profusely and drove away. I went back to hanging lights, thinking about how this whole experience had changed my perspective on community involvement. I'd moved to Pine Ridge looking for a quiet place to rebuild my life after divorce. Instead, I'd ended up leading a revolt against a corrupt HOA board and helping send someone to prison. It wasn't what I'd planned, but it had given me a sense of purpose I hadn't expected. The house felt less empty now. I'd made real friends in Marcus, Chris, and Jennifer. I'd met my neighbors and actually knew their names. The community felt like a community, not just a collection of houses with arbitrary rules. On New Year's Eve, the HOA threw a party at the clubhouse. It was open to all phases, and the turnout was impressive. The new board had hired a DJ and caterers, funding it from the recovered embezzlement money. I saw Helen and her husband there, along with dozens of other residents I'd met over the past year and a half. Even David, the other Phase 3 board member, showed up with his family. At midnight, Marcus raised his glass in a toast. To new beginnings, honest leadership, and communities that actually give a damn about all their residents. Everyone cheered and clinked glasses. I looked around the room at the faces of my neighbors, people from all three phases mixing and celebrating together, and felt genuine happiness. The fight had been exhausting and stressful. There had been moments when I'd wanted to give up, when the harassment and intimidation had felt overwhelming. But we'd persevered, and we'd won. More importantly, we'd proven that ordinary homeowners could hold their HOA board accountable when they were willing to stand together and fight for what was right. Nancy Winters had thought she was untouchable, that her position gave her power we couldn't challenge. She'd been wrong in the end. That was the real lesson of the whole experience. HOAs are supposed to serve their communities, not rule over them. Board members are supposed to be fiduciary stewards, not petty tyrants. And when those principles are violated, homeowners have both the right and the responsibility to demand better. Standing in that clubhouse, surrounded by neighbors who'd become friends through shared struggle, I realized that the $2,300 assessment bill that had started this whole saga had been worth it. Not because I'd wanted to pay it, obviously, but because challenging it had led to exposing corruption, reforming a broken system, and building a genuine community. I'd come to Pine Ridge looking for a fresh start. I'd found that, but in a completely unexpected way. Not through isolation and quiet, but through standing up, speaking out, and refusing to accept unfair treatment. Nancy Winters was in prison. The HOA was reformed. Phase 3 had equal representation and fair treatment, and I had a community that felt like home. That was the best outcome I could have hoped for, even if I'd never imagined things would go quite so far when I first opened that envelope 18 months ago. Life in Pine Ridge continued beyond that New Year's celebration. Spring brought new challenges that the reformed board handled competently and transparently. A water main broke on the parkway and needed emergency replacement. The board called a special meeting, presented 3 contractor bids, answered questions, and held a vote. The assessment was shared proportionally based on actual usage data. Phase 3 residents paid less than Phase 1 and 2 because our section had separate water infrastructure. It was fair, logical, and documented. Nobody complained. That's how it was supposed to work all along.